Hello everybody, glad to see you back at my bench for this build of English Electric Lightning F.6 in 1/48 scale. This is a new release from Airfix for this year. The lighting is a highly sought after subject, but quality kits in these scales are hard to find. So when Airfix announced this boxing, complete with a commemorative number 5 Squadron rough coin, which drove my decision on the paint scheme, I jumped on it immediately. So let me show you how I managed her. Let's dive in. Starting with the cockpit or the office. The original parts from the box didn't exactly fill me with the excitement, so I immediately went looking for aftermarkets. The selection is somewhat limited since the last major release was 11 years ago, meaning many sets lack the quality we expect by today. I settled on this resin cockpit set from CMK. You can see the comparison here. It's a significant upgrade over the kit's parts, even if it isn't fully perfect. The instrumental panel uses a film for the dials, so I had to drill out the holes in the resin first to let the detail show through. Next I applied black surfacer to all the parts, followed by medium sea gray. I painted the individual instruments using mainly Vallejo acrylics. I am also leveraging Tamiya panel line accents here. They follow beautifully into the gaps around the switches, making the detail pop. Then a light wash on the floor and side panels to add some depth. I'm even experimenting around with watercolor pencils on the floor to simulate extra wear and texture. finishing with aluminium pencil to add some natural scratches, mainly on the edges. Once the painting was finished, I glued the instrumental film to the back of the panel. And for the glass lenses, I used a drop of Tamiya X22 Clear. With some final touches of wash, the cockpit is complete. And we can move on to the seat. I started by assembling the seat from the Airfix box, which had a massive ugly ejection pin mark right in the middle. But when comparing it to the photos of the real aircraft, this part is miles away from a true Martin Baker Mk4. I chose the resin set from the metallic Decals, which finally met my expectations. Unlike modern ejection seats, these older versions are fun to paint because of a variety of colors on the body, cushions and the parachute pack. To finish the frame, I gave it a dry brush with steel paint for a realistic metallic look. For the fabric elements, this set uses a printed paper material. You dip it into water to remove the backing, but it isn't a sticker. It's more like a very thin, flexible paper. I secured everything using Ammo Ultra Glue. On top of the cushions go the belts and the straps made from the same paper material. For the ejection pull handles, I swapped the paper versions for Eduard photo etched parts. They are much more sturdier and don't bend like the paper ones. A few touches of wash on belts and cushions ensures the seat doesn't look brand new. I think the result looks great. We are about 11 minutes into the video now, enjoying all this aftermarket painting, and I can finally start working on the kit's plastic, beginning with the intakes. There are aftermarket sets for this area, but since the front gear bay is just a narrow dark hole where detail disappears, I decided to stick with the kit's parts. The lighting is not a real stealth eater, so weight is critical here. Airfix recommends 20 grams of ballast. I couldn't fit it all into this tiny space, but I have a feeling I'll find more room for lead further along the build. I also had to sand the ejection marks on the internal intake trunk. As usual, they are located in the least accessible places, something I'm starting to call the Airfix brand label. Now for the nose cone, the only part that is truly visible, I laid down several brownish and yellowish layers of pre-shade. This radar housing wasn't made of metal, but rather a fiberglass composite that weathered into tan or brown tones. After painting it olive drab, I lightly sanded it in the direction of the airflow to reveal the depth of the pre-shade. Unfortunately, I missed catching the sanding on camera, and that isn't a step you can really repeat. Let's get the intake closed up. Let's move on to the nozzles. X-out nozzles are a bit of an obsession for me, so I didn't even wait for the kit to arrive before I ordered these ResKit resins. While the detail is far superior to the kit, it's worth noting that on the real plane, these interiors are often just a dirty coal black. If you paint them that way, you can get away with the kit parts, but I want to play with the finish here. The exhaust tube was originally ceramic, so it started its life white. That's my starting point. From there, I used various metallic shades, burnt iron, steel and jet exhaust to create different tones for the other components. Once the base colors were down, I sealed everything with gloss varnish before starting the weathering. As I mentioned, this fade toward black in service, I applied a heavy wash over the paint. Thanks to the varnish layer, the original metallic color still peeked through the grime. A little dry brushing on the metallic edges brings back the highlights. Then I added more depth to the inner nozzles using oil paints. To finish, I dumped some coal black burnt jet pigment into the nozzles, whipping the excess away in the direction of the airflow. This creates realistic heat stains. In reality, they would be even blacker, but I want to keep some of the ceramic white visible. Finally, I sprayed a bit of black from inside out for a smoked look and sealed them with a flat varnish. Playing with aftermarkets on this kit is honestly more entertaining than the basic assembly, but that's the beauty of the hobby. It's your plane and your world. Whatever makes you happy is the right way to do it. The Lightning's most striking feature is her engine configuration. Two Rolls-Royce Avons stacked vertically. This wasn't just a stylistic choice, it was a way to keep the frontal area as small as possible with maximizing power. In fact, her power up to weight ratio was so high that she was the only aircraft capable of overtaking U-2's pipeline at that altitude. The downside, maintenance. To access the top engine, the bottom one often had to be removed first. It's why you'll see so much oil streaking and heat stains on the belly. Those engines were monsters that lived in a very tight, hot cage. Finally, you can start putting the big pieces together. Starting with the cockpit, you have to be very careful with the fit of the aftermarket resin. I aligned the upper part first and adjusted the tube to fit that, rather than following the original marks on the fuselage. Then comes the intake, and I managed to find more space for ballast here. I added as much as possible. It's better to have a heavy nose than a tail seater at the end. The nozzles go in, and we can finally close up the fuselage. The quality of this mold is not great. There was about a half centimeter misalignment with the fuselage halves in the middle, but I fixed that easily with a bit of a pressure. However, you can tell this engineering is from a previous century. Having joints in the middle of panels that should be seamless is not what you expect from a high quality brand's new release. It was time for endless putting and sanding along every joint. This definitely isn't the shake and break type of a model we've grown used to. There are a couple of endless sanding nights ahead of us. Not much fun, just dust and patience. Each part needed several reworks to make it as seamless as possible. It's important to note that this is actually a 1997 tooling. While there have been several reboxing since then, the core plastic bakes to the late 20th century, which means we are facing some vintage challenges. And after this extensive sanding, I needed to restore the damaged panel lines and even the rivets. Luckily, this large belly tanks joins to the main body right where a panel line should be. The fit isn't great, but for filling, I can use Vallejo acrylic putty. This excess can be removed with a water-damped cotton swab, so no sanding is needed here. Moving to the wings, the gear bays are sadly flat. I did some plates from an old Edwards photo etch set to give them some much more needed depth. The wings themselves arrived either damaged or poorly molded right out of the box. More work for the sandpaper. I am adding the nose ring now, which I'm painting chrome silver on the interior first. The exterior will be handled later as the fit is problematic and requires additional handling. At this stage, I needed to close the canopy, so it was time for the masking. On the real aircraft, there is a prominent pinkish sealant around the glass. I masked and painted this in several steps from the outside. First the pinkish sealant color, and the interior medium sea gray, and finally a mix of NATO black and pure black for a worn semi-gloss finish. I avoid pure out of the bottle black on the airframe, but I will make an exception for the flat anti-glare shield in front of the cockpit later. That should stay as dark as possible. Before placing the canopy, I finished the top cover of the cockpit and added the joystick. The air brakes can be displayed extended, but they lack any internal detail. I decided to paint them aluminum and close them for now. This allows me to paint the camouflage without any distortion, and I can decide whether to open them later. In fact, the lack of detail resulted in me keeping them closed on the final model, probably the first time I've kept something closed that was designed to be opened. Once the hard work on the body is done, I can join the wings and tail to the fuselage. For the position lights, I painted the inside with chrome silver for some sparkle and then masked them off for the main painting phase. We can finally start giving her some life. First came a layer of grey surfacer followed by black base on the wings and belly to provide a deep foundation for natural metal. For the metal itself, I used AK Extreme Metal Aluminium. Once dry, I polished the paint with a makeup swab to bring out the luster. Now it's time to paint the nose ring with chrome silver before it receives additional care later. And I started with a pre-shade of white and light yellow, adding some mahogany stains for the extra wear. This time I skipped the traditional pre-shading of panel lines as they are nearly invisible on the real plane, except for metallic scratches on the excess panels, which I'll add later. For the main camouflage, I used Mr. Paint, starting with green and then dark sea gray. The gray seems a bit lighter than I expect, but it works well as a Mediterranean sun faded finish from her deployment to Malta. In the 1960s and 70s, the Lightning was the primary shield for the UK's nuclear deterrent. Her mission was simple but terrifying fast: scramble from a cold start, climbing to 40,000 feet in under 3 minutes, and intercept Soviet bombers before they reached the English coast. Because she lacked a modern radar-guided missile system for most of her life, she was a point defense interceptor. She was built for speed, not endurance. Most sorties lasted barely 40 minutes, meaning every second the pilot spent in the air was a high-speed sprint on the edge of the envelope. Removing the masks, I did some minor touch-ups. This specific airframe XS935 is a bit an outlier because the intake ring was painted in camouflage color rather than left bare metal. I had previously painted it chrome, and now I'm using a wet sponge to lightly sand away the camo paint, revealing a bit of metallic underneath. Finally, I sprayed the anti-glare shield on the nose with black. After a layer of gloss varnish to protect the paint, it was time for the markings. This time the gloss layer was a bit heavier because the decaling session starts with the null walk lines on the wings. They are thin and needed to be perfectly adjusted to the panel lines. The downside is that everything becomes very shiny, not just on your screen but for my eyes as well. If the nose ring looks unusual on this model, it's because it was the heart of the Lightning's weapon system. The bullet in the center of the intake housed an 8i23 Airpass radar. It was a revolutionary bit of kit for its time, but it meant the air intake had to be carefully engineered to feed those hungry engines without starving them at 2 Machs. On XX935, the decision to paint this ring in camouflage rather than leaving it as bare metal was a rare move, and it gives this specific airframe a much more aggressive, unified look compared to her silver-nosed sisters. The maple leaf on the tail is the crest of a number 5 Squadron RAF. The squadron was granted to use the leaf to commemorative its association with the Canadian Corps in France during World War I. They have a prestigious history, moving into the jet age with Meteor Hunter and eventually the lighting from mid 60s to the late 80s. During decaling, I had to unmask the canopy to place that striking yellow lining. This means I'll miss that classic grey reveal of unmasking the glass at the very end of the build, but I've kept the front windshield covered to save a bit of magic. I also repainted the gun base with super iron, slightly darker than the surrounding aluminum. With the decal set, I gave her another layer of clear followed by satin varnish and a matte finish for the nose anti-glare stripe. While that dries, we can look at the missiles. For the armament, I'm using these ResKit Firestreak missiles. Interestingly, on the Malta deployed Lightnings, they were painted dark green rather than the standard white. It's a bit of a shame as the dark paint hides much of the beautiful resin detail, but it's historically accurate. The Firestreak was Britain's first truly effective heat-seeking missile, recognized by its unique 32-faced glass nose. While usually painted white, these Malta-based missiles were finished in a dark green to better suit the low-level overwater camouflage requirements over the Mediterranean. Despite its age, it gave the lighting a deadly stink during the Cold War. The last remaining sub-assemblies are the landing gears. I used the kit legs, but the front leg had a strange large hole in the front. I couldn't identify any landing light that belonged here, so I filled it with putty. It still wasn't perfect even after 3 rounds, so I decided to ignore it and hide it during the final assembly. The wheels are from ResKit. Since this is an older set, it required some heavy cutting and drilling, but they are a massive improvement over the kit parts. Tires are painted with tire black, while the discs and the legs are finished in silver. A bit of wash, different shade of black for more realism, and some pencil scratches add the final bit of depth. The satin varnish applied earlier is essential when using oil paints for the weathering, as the thinner could otherwise damage the base paint. I'm starting with the highlighting of the panelize with well-diluted sepia. And the excess of this oil wash needs to be removed in the direction of the airflow. using Starship Filth mixed with dark earth to dirt the walkways on the wings. And I'm also touching the mount of the external fuel tanks. The brush is dumped in odorless thinner and the paint is spread and blended across the surface. Once dry, I fine-tune the effect with a cotton swab, removing excess and controlling the intensity. One of the greatest advantages of oils is that they remain workable even after several hours. Next, I use Starship Fill to create oil leakage stains around the vents, some quite characteristics for the lighting. I then introduce some heat staining around the engine areas using burnt umber, which typically shows the most wear on Cold War jets. I still want to break up the uniformity of the camouflage further. The pre-shade shows through nicely, but the finish still felt a bit too even, so I experimented with watercolor pencils. They naturally work better on a flat surface, but I will try them on this satin finish. Starting with chipping color for some darker stains and scratches. Then using different shades on the camouflage, just small stains painted with a pencil and then blended with a damp brush. Finally, I highlighted selected panel edges and rivets with aluminum pencil to simulate worn metal. That completes the weathering. I'm happy with the result. So let's complete it. First, I will mount the missile launchers, and I can move on to the gears and the covers. Missing detail on the front bay cover, the mount to the leg I added from a photo etch set. And here I'm masking that famous unresolved hole on the front leg with a remove before flight flag. Adding the red white brings in a nice bit of an extra color. The instructions on the cover positions for the main leg is, let's say, unclear. It required a lot of study to figure out how to place them and also modify a bit. For the pito tube, I will use an aftermarket needle, much thinner than the kit's plastic part. And I can mount the horizontal stabilizers, the Firestreaks, and the steel ring on the nozzles. Still a bit of a paint work to do on the position lights. Then I mounted the large overwing fuel tanks, which really define the Lightning's iconic silhouette. And I'll add some photo etched parts to the canopy, including the mirror and the photo etched parts along the cockpit sides. Installing the seat, and let's unmask here. So how do you like her? Leave a comment, I will be happy to read them all. If you like the video, I'd be grateful for a like or even a hype if that's available for you. Thank you very much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss my future builds. And here she is, the English Electric Lightning F.6.